Good morning. The Senate will come to order for this Thursday, March 11th. Roll call, please.
Roll call, day 18, Thursday, March 11th. Anderson?
Here.
Baldwin?
Here.
Whitman?
Here.
Boner? Bouchard? Case? Cooper?
Here.
Driscoll?
Here.
Ellis? French?
Here.
Furphy?
Here.
Guru?
Here.
Hicks?
Here.
Hutchings?
Here.
James?
Here.
Kinski?
Here.
Cole?
Present.
Cost?
Here.
Landon?
Here.
McEwen? Nethercott? Pappas?
Here.
Excused.
Perkins?
Here.
Rothfuss?
Here.
Salazar?
Yes.
Schuler? Scott?
Here.
Steinmetz? Wasserberger?
Here.
McEwen?
Here.
Nethercott? President Dockstader?
Here.
30 present.
Thank you. Prayer by Father Tom Crunkleton.
Let us pray. Lord God, as we pause after committee hearings and prepare to enter into the session as the whole Senate, give us this restful moment, a chance to remember all the blessings you have bestowed upon us individually and as a state. Thank you. And to ask your blessings to be with us this day as we address the many issues coming before us. May this breath, this pause, invigorate us. Grace our discussions, our debate, our votes, and all that we do with the gift of your graciousness, your knowledge, and your wisdom. Amen.
Amen.
Senator Hicks, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Lay well.
Reading correction, approval of the journal. Will the reading clerk please read the journal committee report?
Mr. President, your journal committee reports that the journal of March 10, 2021 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Cole, the chairman.
Are there any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. Again, we please, Senator Perkins.
What'd you call me?
So I called you president for 2 years.
Oh, okay. I thought it was worse than that, but anyway, thank you. May I approach the floor, Mr. President?
Please do.
Mr. President, two things. One is, again, thank you for your work. It was a long night. It might have been a short night for some of us. Actually, you know, at some point you ought to stand up and stretch your arms out and take a deep breath and get ready for the day. The other thing is, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, after I went home last night, I tuned into and saw the second half of the Cowgirls in the championship game of the Mountain West tournament. And the Cowgirls, who were a 7th seed, won the championship last night against Fresno State. It was awesome. And, you know, it's too bad that Coach Legursky wasn't there for that after his great career, but the new coach and those ladies actually obviously have a great chemistry and a lot of affection between them. It was, if you have the chance or you can see it, maybe if you get on the Cowboy website, you might be able to see the last 2 minutes of that game are incredible, Mr. President. They had, in fact, Fresno State had the ball with an out of bounds with maybe 20 seconds left. They're 1 point down, and the coaching and the defensive play and how those ladies executed the coach's instructions and how they and the defense had clamped down and got that ball back was just phenomenal. It was a great game. And first time the Cowgirls have done that. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring that to the body's attention, something to be proud about, something to feel good about today. Thank you, Mr. President. And the men play, I think San Diego State today. That'll be a tall order for them, but we'll see what happens. You never know. That's why they play the game.
Good report. You ever get tired of being a CPA and an attorney? I have a sports broadcasting job for you. Senator Landon.
Well, Mr. President, I appreciate Senator Perkins for bringing up what was really a lot of fun last night, and wanted to just remind the body that the coach, Gerald Mattinson, is a Rock Springs native. And he came over many, many years ago to play for the legendary Sweet Erickson, who is an NJCAA Hall of Fame coach, as many of you know. Gerald is probably one of the top 5 or 6 players of all time at the college up in Casper, and an All-American. And it doesn't surprise me that some of Sweet Erickson's principles, which is if you don't play defense, you don't play for me. And I got to believe that some of that trickled all the way down. And you notice that his Cowgirl team is one outstanding defensive team. So lots of congratulations. I wonder, Mr. President, if the good senator from the hometown of our university would maybe want to lead us in Cowboy Joe. What do you think of that?
Good suggestion. Senator Rothfuss, you have an assignment.
Everyone ready? He always sings. When they hear him coming, cause the Western folks all know he's a Hollywood son of a gentleman. Wyoming ragtime cowboy, talking about your cowboy, ragtime cowboy. C-O-W-B-O-Y-S. Cowboys, cowboys, cowboys. Both of them. Yeah. We should do both.
That was great. Great. The youth just walking in have a preview of what their life will be when they're legislators. All right. Senator Cost,
May I have the privilege of the floor, Mr. Chairman?
please do and
Mr.
do that.
President.
Do that wonderful introduction of those youth.
I do want to make an introduction of a special group. Today, we're privileged to have the Youth for Justice from Cody, Wyoming, and their wonderful sponsor, Mrs. White. They're down here to learn a little more about legislation and to even talk to you about different bills that they happen to have a passion for. So let's give them the good, big old Senate welcome for being part of our group.
Welcome to the Senate. I'm sure you'll get a chance to meet every senator while you're here. Thank you for coming to the Capitol. All right, reminder that University of Wyoming Family Practice is helping us with medical referrals. We have the number up here. Thank you to Father Crunkleton for helping us this week. Today in Wyoming history, in 1881, Laramie Boomerang, Laramie's newspaper, first published. It is still being published today, 1881. Quote for the day: use your fear. It can take you to the place where you store your courage. Amelia Earhart. Session status, budget week. Tomorrow is third reading. Deadline for third reading amendments to Senate File 1 are due to legal today by 5 p.m. Deadline 5 p.m. House bills on first reading. Excuse me, skip that. We're going to bills on second reading. How about that? We're just move right along. Second reading, Senate File 30, second reading of the Senate file. There are no amendments. Senate File 30, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 122, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 122, Wyoming Agriculture Authority.
Thank you. And Senate File 122 having been read two separate times. Yeah, I'm going to come back to that other one. Oh, Senator Scott, I'm going to come back to the one that wasn't read in. I'm going to come back to the one that wasn't read in. Go ahead. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, on Senate File 122, I will rise to ask a question. Frankly, with all that went on yesterday and all the distractions, I was unable to understand any of the explanation and would like to request a very brief summary. What does this bill do and why should we vote for it? And Mr. President,
Go
I
ahead.
apologize. That's the sort of thing general file is for, but I don't know about the rest of you. When we got to general file last night, I was not functional at that point.
All right. And just for clarification, everybody here okay? I had my speaker prepared overnight. Everybody okay? Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Briefly, what this does is bill does it establishes the Wyoming Agriculture Authority, similar to say the Wyoming Energy Authority. So two objectives in achieving it. Well, first of all, the issue that's trying to solve is a lack of resilient processing capacity for our ag industries. Clearly, meatpacking has been the forefront, but it could apply to anything moving forward. We don't know what the next crisis will be, and has an opportunity to really promote that value-added nature in Wyoming to our ag products, whether that be meat, it could be crops, it could be anything. So that's the overall objective, similar to the Energy Authority. You have the opportunity for low interest loans, or even maybe a better example is the Community Development Authority to go ahead and pursue these projects. And the idea being hopefully it's a little bit more like the Energy Authority, and that if you go down the road of pursuing a project, the private sector will go ahead and step in and take care of it. So that's one of the primary objectives. The other one, it's an opportunity to reorganize state government. There's different functions that support agriculture spread out through the Department of Agriculture, Business Council, state lands, probably a few others, Livestock Board, obviously. And it'd be an opportunity to really consolidate the functions of state government that are regulatory in nature under the Department of Agriculture. And that should be their primary objective, after all, consumer protection and so on, meat inspection, that sort of thing. But then maybe move some of the other functions that clearly advocate for agriculture. The obvious ones being, say, the Beef Council, Wheat Marketing Commission, Dry Bean Commission, those sorts of things, obviously move underneath the Ag Authority. So they're the ones advocating for agriculture, and with the potential of, say, weed and pest, predator control, the things that support ag in addition to many other things throughout our state, have that clear distinction and kind of consolidate the functions of state government under one roof that truly support agriculture. So that's a two-pronged objective. That's what we're hoping to do. And this is just getting beginning. It basically appoints 7 board members, and then we'll, over the interim, we'll work hard to make sure we have that reorganization effort take focus over the interim, as well as any tweaks we need to the statutes.
Senator Scott, does that cover it for you, sir?
Mr. President, yes, and I do apologize to the Senate, but the general file last night, I don't know about the rest of you, but I was not that functional. This one, I just couldn't understand.
Thank you. All right. Floor leader was taking a page out of the previous floor leader's book yesterday. Senator Landon.
Mr. President, I would ask that that Senate File 73, tolling authority for I-80, be re-referred to our Appropriations Committee. There is a lot of money involved with that bill, and we thought maybe it prudent to send it upstairs for a review.
Okay, let's do this where we haven't closed out on this one. Hold that thought for just a second. Stay right where you're at. Senate File 122 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. I apologize, Senator Lannon, one more repeat, if you could, please.
Mr. President, the apology is mine. I should have let the bill clear. I apologize. But without objection, I would ask that Senate File 73, tolling authority for I-80, be re-referred to the Appropriations Committee. It does contain the provision for a lot of money eventually, and I think it prudent to send it upstairs for a review by the Appropriations Committee.
Absent objections, referred to Appropriations Committee 2. And folks, for the record, I'm going to repeat on Senate File 30 and have the reading clerk read it in. So at that point, let's go with Senate File 30 pandemic response, or Senate File 30, second reading of the Senate file. Reading clerk, read the bill.
Senate File 30, Pandemic Response Review Task Force.
Senate File 30 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection is so ordered. Okay, we took care of that for the record. Senate File 124, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 124, Defending Wyoming Business, Trade and Commerce Amendments.
Senate File 124 having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 148, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 148, Requirements Relating to Depositors Amendments.
Second Senate File 148, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 157, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 157, Property Rights Limitation on Local Authority.
There are amendments. Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move second reading amendment number 1, corrected copy to Senate File 157 and ask for your favorable consideration. We had good debate on.
Just a moment, could we have it read in?
Oh,
Just
yes, please read it.
a little catch there.
Senate File 157, second reading amendment number 1, corrected copy, page 2, line 4, after.
Thank you, Senator Biteman. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you recall, during the floor debate on Committee of the Whole.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now it has to be moved, I'm afraid. Order can't go the other way. Sorry.
You need to go back to the donuts. Okay.
I am. Back to the donut.
Mr. President, I was hoping he wasn't going to try dividing the amendment, so
Thank
that's
you.
a good thing.
With that having been said, go ahead and move it.
Okay, third time's a charm, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 157 and ask for your favorable consideration. As you recall, during the good discussion we had during Committee of the Whole, the good former president brought up some really good points, and we took those to heart and trying to make this bill better. And as we go through this process, that is my goal, and to try to really hone in on what the objective is here. So with that being said, I introduce you to this new amendment. Turn to page 2 of your bill, line 4, and then after deed restrictions, delete the balance of the line. And then page 2, line 5, delete the line through the word of and insert on. After properties, insert that impose uses that are not required by applicable zoning regulations. I think it goes to directly what the good former president was saying on Committee of the Whole. I find that a very, very favorable amendment to this bill and makes it better. And I'll stand for any questions. Thank you.
Questions or discussion? Ready for the question? All those in favor of the second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 157, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Amendment has passed. Senate, oh, there is one more amendment.
Senate File 157, second reading amendment number 2, delete the.
Senator Grew.
Mr. Chairman, I would move second reading amendment number 2 and ask for your favorable consideration. On this amendment, what I'm trying to do in the first part of the amendment is to strike the word deed from restrictions. On your desk, I handed out a sheet for you to take a look at. It was characterized in that good debate that we had on Monday as low-income housing, and I kind of wanted to dispel that. I think low-income housing kind of conjures up, at least in my mind, an image
that doesn't really quite fit in, at least in the part of the state that I live. In my part of the state, my county, we've raised over $22.7 million locally for affordable housing projects. We've done that at the ballot box. We have done it through private donations, and we've done it with the help of developers. All of whom, and I can say this with self-assurance because in other jobs in my previous life, I've held elected office as a town councilman and a county commissioner. And I have been one who has never in my political time ever voted against a housing development in my county. I repeat, never voted against one. Working with developers side by side, we've achieved the goal of building over 1,241 units of affordable housing, deed restricted housing. It is a fundamental part of our housing and planning to keep people, of working people, living in our community and not having to travel hours on end to be able to get to and from work. Who are these people? They're public health nurses, they're teachers, firefighters, patrolmen, and librarians. Their average salaries are listed here. And there's also rental data of the problem that is created when land values go up and some of the issues we have of people being able to stay in our community, people who we need. And you only notice it when there's a storm, so people can't get into town and there's only one teller at the bank, or there's only one checker at the grocery store. Or instead, when you go to a movie theater, you don't see, as most of you do, when back to the good center from Kemmer, when they used to have movies and have the movie theater open, where you'd see a teacher, you'd see the local firefighter there next to you in line buying popcorn and could talk to them. It's something that is rare in our community, and we're trying desperately to keep it. So that's why deed restricted affordable housing is so important to our community. It is an absolute imperative. And that's why in this amendment, I'd like to remove the word deed from restrictions. I too agree, don't want communities and local elected officials to hold landowners hostage. I also know that we have to work together. And so I just want to take this word out because I don't think it rises to the level of what the amendment, I think, characterizes it to be, and ask for your favorable consideration.
Senator, further discussion or questions on the amendment? Questions or discussion? Senator Perkins.
So I'm trying to put this all together. And I mean, at the end of the day, I guess, you know, so with the bill as it stands now, prior to this current amendment, what it says is that you basically, that in establishing sewer rights, that you can't force, in order as a condition of a hookup or a condition of obtaining and having the value of water and sewer, those types of utilities that are oftentimes controlled by cities, though not always, they can't force as a condition of the use or attaching and getting access to that system, you can enforce a deed restriction, which seems to me wholly reasonable. I mean, typically in a deed restriction, Mr. President, unless I'm missing them, maybe, and I understand that Teton County faces a lot of issues and a lot of things that the rest of us in our cities and towns don't face. I get that. But generally a deed restriction is either imposed usually by a buyer on by a seller on a buyer, something about some kind of condition about that. And usually it's because there's something else happening there. I'm kind of racking my brain to figure out when and how a county would enforce a restriction on a deed unless it's part of because usually those are imposed. For example, if you buy in a housing development and somebody's doing development of housing, usually there's covenants that are automatically imposed on your deed. So I'm struggling to understand why this is a problem, and taking this deed out helps, because quite frankly, I don't understand why a utility, I'm trying to understand in a practical matter, why a utility provider would impose deed restrictions on anybody. Because it seems to me those part of the land use plan. That's something that's due, you'd want to come out of your land use plan, more particularly your zoning regulations, but maybe your county's land use plan. And I'm just really struggling to understand how those deed restrictions would be unless they're already enforceable against a property owner. And so maybe you can help this out, because as this is modified, trying to make this so this will work for every city and town in the state, because it's going to apply to every city and town in the state. And I'm kind of liking where it is right now, unless I can understand where this is and what this does and why it's a bad thing, because I can't imagine in 99.9% of the contracts and other issues involving hookups to utilities, why they would ever enforce a deed restriction anyway. So at the very least, this doesn't do anything. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. And I just wanted to salute my friend from Natrona County. Through the years that I've spent down here, I've always kind of enjoyed coming in. We're always in early, and I always go over to the senator and I say, well, what did you fix last night? And I've always really honored that. So today, that amendment that we just passed really helped me a lot, Mr. President, to get closer to being able to support this bill. But here's what was on my mind last night after the game. I was thinking about this bill. I was up in the chair, Mr. President, and so I really didn't get in on the conversation. But I always get a little nervous when it's a late night run and it comes down from an individual place. And we're getting quite a few of these issues that come from your part of the world over in the western part of the state. And my concern with this amendment is not so much the language, because I think it reads well. My concern is I'm not sure why we have folks who are advocating out and away from our senator who represents that county. And I always like to try to support those who represent that part of the world. And so I'm really, that's part of the conundrum that we sometimes find ourselves in, Mr. President, in the work we do here. But I guess my question for the bringer of this amendment is, maybe could he please reiterate what the heartburn is with that first amendment that we passed, and how does this make it better? I just am not quite there yet. Thank you, Mr. President.
Do we want to have any more before we go back to Senator Grew? Let's go back to Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. I just voted for the last amendment, and I appreciate it helped me a great deal with the bill as well. Still, I have this, and I guess I need to make myself clear. There hasn't been a case where this has occurred. And even in this particular case that brought this bill, and it is a bill about pretty much a single issue that's happening right now, has it been done? There is no government that I know of, no government entity that is telling a developer that they can't hook up to a water sewer because they don't provide affordable housing or any other kind of housing or anything else. Hasn't happened, it's just not factual. So, that having been said, for us or for me, the word deed restriction and then other restrictions talked about in, even now in this bill, I'd just like to drop the word deed and keep the word restrictions. That does not mean that if the deed restriction is there, it can be, but for me, putting deed restrictions in specifically elevates that to a level that I don't think is necessary or fair in this particular case. So that's why, and as far as the second half, frankly, of the amendment, as far as the effective date, that has now become a non-issue. But, and so that I'd be happy to either withdraw that part of the amendment or fix it on third, whichever. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are you ready for the question? Question being called. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 157, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
The amendment has failed. Senate File 157, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, do you have a consent list?
Mr. President, we do have a consent list. I move third reading consent list, which is as follows. Senate File 36, for-profit public benefit corporations. Senate File 62, extending sunset date for the Office of Consumer Advocate. Senate File 96, homicide amendments. Senate File 101, pen registers and trap devices authorization. Senate File 106, transportation statutory amendments 1. Senate File 117, speech and hearing specialist licensing amendments.
Thank you. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Oh, would anybody like any of these bills removed from the consent list? Having been read 3 separate times, Senator Bouchard, there we go, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can we pull 101 off the list for debate?
At least it's not 104.
Senate File 101 has been removed from the consent list.
This is your now file.
Again, would anyone like any bills removed from the consent list? Having been read 3 separate times, the question.
Working off a different list than I have here for Thursday, March 11th. I don't see a Senate File 101 on the third reading consent list. Is it 110 or do we have an up? Yeah, this is the Thursday one.
Well,
The date
let's just hold back for just a moment with this side.
Oh, but it's not on this. Oh, there it is. Mr. President.
Never mind.
Is this a never mind?
I found a little nugget in here.
I was going to tell you, it's the one with the one.
Mr. President, that's what a COVID shot the day before will do to you.
All righty. Once again. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills be read? Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the Senate? Senate File 36, Senate File 62, Senate File 96, Senate File 106, Senate File 117. The chief clerk will call the roll. We'll include the catch title this time. Senate File 36, for profit public benefit corporations. Senate File 62, extending sunset date for Office of Consumer Advocate. Senate File 96, homicide amendments. Senate File 106, transportation statutory amendments 1. Senate File 117, speech and hearing specialist licensing amendments. Chief clerk will call the roll.
on the consent list. Anderson. Baldwin. Beitman. Boner. Bouchard.
Aye.
Case. Cooper. Driscoll. Ellis. French. Murphy. Guru. Hicks. Hutchings. James. Kinsky. Cole. Cost. Landon. McEwen. Nethercott. Pappas. Perkins. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Steinmetz. Wasserberger. President Dockstader. On the consent list, 30 aye. Senate File 36, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 36, 30 aye. Senate File 62, are there any changes? Beitman, aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 62, 29 aye, 1 no. Senate File 96, are there any changes? Case? Aye to no. Rothfuss?
Aye to no.
Aye to no. Scott? Aye to no. Closing vote. Guru? Aye to no. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 96, 24 aye, 26 aye, 4 no. Senate File 106, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 106, 30 aye. Senate File 117, are there any changes? Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 117, 30 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 36, for-profit public benefit corporations, Senate File 62, extending sunset date for the Office of Consumer Advocate, Senate File 96, homicide amendments, Senate File 106, transportation statutory amendments 1, Senate File 117, speech and hearing specialist licensing amendments have passed the Senate. Back to Senate File 101. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, before we go there, I would like to be able to explain my vote on Senate File 96, and I believe that procedure is allowed under our rules. And Mr. President, I didn't seek to pull it off or touch off a lengthy and emotional debate about it. Mr. President, I agreed with the purpose of the bill and the effect it will have on the law. But Mr. President, I felt compelled to vote against the bill because there's some definitions in there that frankly, my church does not agree with, does not approve of. They are definitions that a number of the religious organizations, churches in the state do agree with and approve, and I respect their right to do that. But I think it would be much better in legislation in the future, Mr. President, if we could be a little sensitive to some of those things. And there's ways to define what we were doing that don't get into the differences between the churches. But I did feel compelled to vote against it for that reason.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Let's go back to Senator Bouchard. You pulled that off the consent list, removed it. Please address.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to talk about 101. I'm very concerned. A lot of the things that I've looked at were Fourth Amendment violations. And as I see what's happening in our country, most of us are going to be considered right-wing extremists by the federal government. I just see a big push now that people in Wyoming are at risk of what's going on in our country, just if you think differently. And now what we're doing is we just don't worry about the Fourth Amendment, and we're going to push legislation that I think just makes it easier to do things without real search warrants. And that's why I'm standing in opposition to this bill. I mean, I've heard arguments that we've done it and we do it and other states do it and it's all okay. I'm just not going to buy that. I think we need to start defending the Fourth Amendment. We need to defend the Constitution. People have rights. Why should we make it so easy? That's why we have courts. That's why we have search warrants. I'd just say vote this down. We need to look at it more.
For the record, we are on Senate File 101. Senator Case.
I am not tracking on all cylinders today, but I apologize if I screwed this up. But I don't believe this is the proper time to discuss point 101. When a bill is removed from the consent list, it drops to the bottom of the list, and there are two other bills ahead of it that would be discussed in normal term and read. So technically, I don't even think 101 has actually been read in because it's been pulled off the consent list.
You are correct, Senator.
So
So we're going to withdraw this discussion at this point.
I am sorry, and I
It's
thought I
okay.
screwed it up, but thank you.
Senate File, we're going to drop that all the way down below Senate File 110. Okay. Continuing with bills on third reading now. I do have a clarification on the rules. Let's do this. Normally, we do take the bills in numerical order. So as we start third reading, folks, what we're going to do is move 101 to this list. It'll be Senate File 101, Senate File 102, Senate File 110. For those in the chamber and those listening and watching. Would the reading clerk read in the bill, Senate File 101?
Senate File 101, pen registers and trap and trace devices authorization, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to criminal procedure.
Okay, for the record, Senate File 101, third reading in the Senate file. There are no amendments. We'll take the discussion now. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I still continue to have concern because the language is loose enough that anybody that is involved in a potential felony is still eligible for a quick warrant under the way this is structured. So that's all felonies, every last one of them. I know that the intent in this discussion was violent crimes, and I know that we're intended to conjure up circumstances which probably are very well justified, where you've got a horrible situation where somebody's life is in danger and you need to immediately find out the recent call history of the individual or whatever else the case may be, so that you can track that down. And certainly that would be a good use of this technology. But that's not the language, Mr. President, that we're passing if we support this on third reading. The language we're passing if we support this on third reading is if a good Senate colleague over here near me, to the right of me, is suspected of, we'll say, felony embezzlement or of a couple $1,000s, something along those lines, and I am associated with it, then that would be justification under the way that this is structured by the language. And getting back to the privacy interest and the threshold that we want, where we're trying to protect and balance privacy interests with the needs of law enforcement, this is a very, very low bar. But the concept is a very, very good concept. So regrettably, I don't think we're there yet. I am sensitive to the idea that if we have a true crime of violence and there's a threat, a direct and impending threat taking place, this is a reasonable search. But just making it a quick warrant to get some information on a low-level felony, it's not what's advertised, and it's certainly at that point an easy erosion of privacy rights that I share my colleagues' concern, although I don't think anyone's going to mistake me for the far right anytime soon. I still share the interest in privacy rights and believe that we need to carefully balance it, and this doesn't do that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. We are on Senate File 101, pin registers and trap and trace device authorization. Continued discussion. Continued discussion. Senator Case.
Well, Mr. President, I handed out a 4-page document that discusses this issue. It came from, it's one of those unsolicited emails we get. Don't believe everything you get on the internet. I'd like to get the sponsor's reaction to that document.
Before we go back to the sponsor, any other questions? And let me also, Senator Bouchard, you kind of got caught up in the sorting out of the rules there. Did you want to follow up on any more? Okay. All right. We're back to the sponsor, Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good senators, bear with me here for just a minute. You saw in the back room that we annually get the Wyoming Historical Calendar. I love this thing. I find it really humorous and still very relevant today, and realize that even 100, sometimes 150 years later, nothing changes. Of note, on today's date, March 11th, for today's calendar, the notation is a citizen of Laramie, Wyoming, identified as a conscientious objector, was sent to the detention center. I think that's particularly pertinent for today. Interesting also, our lone conscientious objector, always on the outskirts there, going to the detention center. Have no fears, have no fears. But later on in the month, for the March 22nd and March 25th, I noted on March 22nd, it's the first Wyoming telephone exchange is established in Cheyenne in 1881. And if you remember from the testimony on the original presentation of this bill, I implored you to understand that these are not new devices and they've been around since the advent of the telephone. I stand by that statement. And so I have no doubt that this particular technology was around in 1881 before we were a state. And then 3 days later on our little calendar, an opium raid was conducted in Newcastle. I find that I think that's very predictable on how this bill and this technology works. And so just some humor as we looked at this calendar. I took great pleasure in that. Evidently you don't. So to answer the questions about concerns of the Fourth Amendment, and we've had this conversation before, oftentimes on these criminal justice issues, the Fourth Amendment applies all of the time. I'm not familiar with the term a quick warrant. I don't know what that means. I think it lacks a clear understanding of what goes into those warrants. They're frequently 20+ pages of establishing probable cause, where you then have to find an available judge, go through the county attorney's office first, or the district attorney, or the U.S. attorney's office, have the judge sign off. Oftentimes they're rejected. Oftentimes they're not. These investigative tools are everywhere. The Fourth Amendment is certainly a defense attorney's friend, and that they use and employ. Our system of justice is working in the United States. This practice is currently existing and has been existing in our state since the 70s. We're expanding it, yes, to felonies instead of just drug-related crimes as a result of a need for a new investigative tool. I think we're ignoring and missing the point of how technologically reliant our society has come. I mean, look at all of our desks. If you believe that crime is not being committed and evidence of crime is not being found on this type of technology, I mean, is that the suggestion here? That we shouldn't use technology-related investigative tools because why? Remember, I can get a warrant for your blood. I can get a warrant for your home. I can get a warrant for anything. So why would we exclude your phone numbers one-to-one? Which in the handout provided to you, the court has identified that the phone number to phone number connection really isn't that particularly confidential. Why is that? Why is it the fact that one number connecting to another number doesn't hold that level of privacy? How do you feel about that as citizens? It's been that way for a long, long time, primarily as a result of a private utility a private phone company, having all those records anyway. Some of you remember when you used to call the operator and you'd speak to a human and then they'd connect you and that operator was on the phone the entire time? There comes down to a level of understanding of how our society operates and what the technology is used. Again, I don't feel, just receiving this particular handout 5 minutes ago, I would suggest to you that it is a wonderful recitation of some of our country's jurisprudence associated with Fourth Amendment and this technology. We found it correct. I think of note too, and I haven't had a chance to study it, our own Wyoming Supreme Court struck down a case on Fourth Amendment grounds this past week. It's alive and well. And those balances are in place and this is fine. But I believe as a society, it's important that we give law enforcement those tools and they do investigate those crimes that are appropriate. Those crimes that if I were to say, you would think I was trying to appeal to your emotions. I'm not trying to appeal to your emotions. They really are investigating child exploitation and human trafficking. They really are investigating sexual assault and homicides. Those crimes really are occurring, and these are the tools that they need in order to investigate those. I'm not trying to appeal to your emotions. That's a fact. They are asking for these tools in order to protect our society. They are asking for these tools through the Fourth Amendment process, through establishment of probable cause, and through a judge for felonies. Yes.
We're at 5 minutes, but can
Thank you, Mr.
close
President.
out your thought if you need to.
Vote aye.
All right,
I was expecting more laughing on the calendar.
ready for the question. Senate File 101, having received an excuse me. Senate File 101 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Roll call, Senate File 101. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? No. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? No. French? No. Furphy? Aye. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? No. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? No. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstader? No. Closing vote. Closing vote closed. Senate File 101, 17 aye, 13 no.
Senate File 101 having received the affirmative vote of the majority of members elected to the Senate, Senate File 101 has passed the Senate. Senate File 102, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 102, unclaimed cooperative utility deposits and payments, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, an act relating to cooperative utilities.
There is an amendment. Reading clerk, read it in.
Senate File 102, third reading amendment number 1, corrected copy, page 2, line 8, delete.
Senator Nethercott.
Mike, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I would move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 102. Make sure I have the corrected copy you should have. Good senators, this language has full consensus and has been worked on by the stakeholders, and what it does is cleans up the language through some efforts with those co-ops and the utilities. And so the language is being amended to state, quote, the right of an owner to unclaimed refunds for deposits or advance payments held by a cooperative utility is extinguished when the unclaimed refunds are used by the cooperative utility for the benefit of its general membership in accordance with this subsection. Nothing in this subsection precludes a cooperative utility from refunding subsequently claimed funds at the cooperative utility's discretion. And so same concepts we've been discussing throughout this bill, just provides, I think, further clarification and explains the concept a little cleaner. And this is, again, at the request of stakeholders to make sure there's those clarities present. Stand for questions, ask for your favorable consideration.
Discussions or questions on the amendment? Are you ready for the question? Question being called. This is on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 102, corrected copy. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. Back on the bill. Are you ready for the question? Senate File 102, unclaimed cooperative utility deposits and payments. Having reading clerk will call the roll.
Roll call on Senate File 102. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Whitman? No. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? No. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Furphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? No. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? No. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? No. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? No. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstetter? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 102, 23 aye, 7 no.
Senate File 102, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 102 has passed the Senate. Senate File 110, third reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 110, Small Claims Procedures, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to small claims procedures.
There is an amendment. Reading the amendment.
Senate File 110, third reading amendment number 1, page 1, line 10, delete.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 110. Good senators, I'll be brief, sensing we're all a little tired. This bill, as you recall, extended the service of process from outside of a county to the entire state. And so as part of that, I thought it was prudent to also extend the dates for a response time, allowing for a defendant additional time to respond to a small claims action. And that's been changed from not more than 12 days nor less than 30 to not more than 20 days, no less than 12 days. With that, I stand for questions and ask for your favorable consideration.
Discussion or question on the amendment? Question being called. Question on third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 110. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Amendment has passed. We are back on the bill. Are you ready for the question? Senate File 110, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? The chief clerk will call the roll.
Roll call on Senate File 110. Anderson? Aye. Baldwin? Aye. Beitman? Aye. Boner? Aye. Bouchard? Aye. Case? Aye. Cooper? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. Ellis? Aye. French? Aye. Murphy? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. James? Aye. Kinsky? Aye. Cole? Aye. Cost? Aye. Landon? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Perkins? Aye. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. Wasserberger? Aye. President Dockstetter? Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 110, 30 aye.
Senate File 110, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 110 has passed the Senate. Consideration of bills on general file. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we are at that order of business consideration of bills on general file.
I move that the committee, Mr. President, I move that the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Senator Boner, you are now in charge of the Senate.
The committee of the whole will come to order. First Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 116. The reading clerk will read in the Senate file.
Senate File 116, Wyoming Business Council Directors Reduction, an act relating to the administration of government, sponsored by Senator Ellis, was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Whiteman, Cooper, Rothfuss, and Wasserberger. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What's your pleasure, Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, to do so with the recommendation that Senate File 116 do pass. And to explain that bill is Senator Ellis. Thank you.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring to you a very straightforward and simple bill with Senate File 116. This deals with the Wyoming Business Council. And if you look at your bill, on page 2 is the relevant language. You'll see that currently there are 15 members who are on the board of directors of the Wyoming Business Council. This bill would simply reduce that number from 15 to 13, beginning on March 1st, 2022. I bring this bill to you at the request of the governor's office. They reached out a little bit ago. And just so you're aware, there are staggered terms among business council members. You can learn more about the terms of each of those. But my understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that in this next class, there are about 3 classes of 5 members per class. There will be 2 members that will be termed out. And so this seemed like a good opportunity to reduce the size of the business council, making it a little bit smaller, a little bit more nimble. And certainly I think that in our fiscal times, although this is a modest budget reduction, if you take a look at your fiscal note, still is a cost savings. So there is not much more to explain beyond that, but happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the sponsor of the bill? Okay, seeing none.
Question.
Okay, so the question being called, those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion that when the committee whole rises to report, do so with favorable consideration on Senate File 116, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Senate File 116 is passed committee of the whole. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File, Joint Resolution 3. The hearing clerk will read in the Senate file.
Senate Joint Resolution 3, Federal Suspension and Orders on Oil and Gas Production, sponsored by Senator Cooper. A joint resolution requesting Congress and the federal government to reverse federal orders and actions that inhibit the safe development of oil and gas in Wyoming and that negatively and disproportionately impact Wyoming citizens and industries. It was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Whiteman, Cooper, and Wasserberger. Senator Rothfuss, no. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
Further reading of the bill, what is your pleasure, Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, I move when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate Joint Resolution 3 do pass. And to explain this good resolution is Senator Cooper, please.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not a big fan of resolutions. I think the net result of them is usually to inform the person on the other end that we've removed them from our Christmas card list. But this one is important. This reiterates our support for the governor and in his letter to the president regarding our position on oil and gas in the state of Wyoming. A little over a month ago on our last day of the 8-day session, we had a great joint minerals meeting with the governor. As a result of that meeting, the governor asked us to develop a resolution to send off to the president and the Department of Interior and our various other delegates in Washington. So this is a result of that request for the governor. Starts out pretty straight up, whole lot of whereases. First of all, we have an abundant and vast natural resource that can be used for production of energy throughout the United States and the world. We produce energy that benefits industries throughout the United States. The energy industry in Wyoming provides millions of dollars in taxes and other revenues annually to the state. The state of Wyoming and the energy industry have worked together for years to develop our energy resources in a safe and environmentally responsible manner. And that's something that really needs talked about for just a second. Our oil and gas minerals in Wyoming are the most regulated and environmentally safe probably anywhere in the world. We get looked at more than just about anybody because of the vast numbers of federal lands we have, which brings us to the next one. Federal government owns almost 1/2 of the surface acreage within the state of Wyoming and more than 42 million acres of mineral estate within the state of Wyoming. So the executive orders issued affect a lot of Wyoming. Federal decisions, those executive orders we're discussing here, banning or pausing production of energy will negatively impact the state of Wyoming and our livelihoods for a long time. Now, what happened here is President Biden signed Executive Order 13990 on January 20th, and that requires the Secretary of Interior to stop all federal leasing on oil and gas resources. It slows things up significantly. Another executive order, 14008, signed on January 27th, indefinitely pauses oil and gas leasing and calls for a comprehensive review of the permitting and leasing practices that potentially evaluate climate impacts. Again, negative impacts to Wyoming. On January 20th, action was taken and orders issued to limit actions, permits, and leases for all oil and gas production within the state on federal lands. And what that means is we can't even go out and get a sundry right now without it going clear to either Grand Junction or to Washington to get it approved. They've taken authority away from our local offices. Something that's going to happen as a result of all this, companies will invest in other places rather than in our local minerals. Places like Venezuela or Russia, where the other countries around the world, where climate emissions are not as regulated and controlled as they are here. Another effect that the Game and Fish brought to us is this decreases their ability to mitigate wildlife impacts and transfer activities to lands that are undisturbed and to really lessen the impact on wildlife. And it really limits their ability to work on habitat reclamation. So it's on the wildlife end of it, it is very detrimental across the state. So with all that said, what we're asking the Secretary of State to do is to direct the president to rescind or reverse or repeal any secretarial orders or executive actions that negatively impact our state. We're reiterating our fact that we strongly oppose those actions of the federal government, and it increases the burden and really an unrealistic and disproportionate impact on the state. It reiterates that we strongly support our congressional delegation in their efforts to curtail some of these executive orders. And it directs the Secretary of State to transmit copies of this resolution to the President of the United States, to the Acting Secretary of the Department of Interior, to the Acting Administrator of the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, to the President of the Senate, to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and to our Wyoming congressional delegation. That's the whole of the resolution, and I'd ask you for your support, please.
Any comments or discussions on the joint resolution? President Dockstader.
Standing in full support of this resolution, I know, folks, we've heard the resolutions matter. I would say they do in this case. Reverse federal orders. Allow for the development of oil and gas in Wyoming. Affects every facet of our life, including everything that we seem to be doing now as we sort through this budget. Stand in full support of this resolution and the sponsor.
Any further discussion? Senator Perkins.
Thank you. I'm probably going to vote against this resolution because I appreciate the sentiments, and but I just continue to feel that they go to wherever they go, usually end up in file 13 or sometimes called the round file, and that's about the end of it. And I think they make us feel good about that we're doing something, but when in fact we're not. But if you're gonna put this, a couple of things that I think you ought to address in your resolution. I think you need another whereas or two. And the two places I think you need some whereases are, one is that, we talk about 40, I think it was 42 million acres of subsurface, Mr. Chairman. It's about 68% of the subsurface of the state is under federal control or federal minerals. But my understanding is that it's in excess of 90%. It's like 94%, somewhere. It's in excess of 90% of all mineral extraction is somehow tied into the federal lands. And that's because they're so intermixed. We talked about the other day, these land swaps, and that's exactly right. You go down to the checkerboard and every other section is federal land. And so, I think that, it's more dramatic than that. It's not just the 68%, but when it affects over 90% of the mineral extraction in the state. So I think that's one. But the other thing that's missing there is I think the direct effect on, we have all the stuff about the state and the Committee of the Whole Amendment that we haven't dealt with yet, I think is a great step in the right direction. But we don't have anything about how it affects the workforce and the amount of work, the people in the state that are affected. And I think that if you're going to do that, you should find out and should include in there the number of direct and indirect employees of this state, workers in the state whose jobs are either directly or in service industries. When I mean said indirect, I'm talking mostly about service industries that are directly tied to this energy economy that we have. And I think that we need to do that because it's not just about what it does to the coffers of the state and our state as a whole, but it has a direct effect upon the people of the state. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that.
Further discussion, Senator Driscoll.
Chairman, thank you, Anand, for we just got a good suggestion for second reading amendment, and we thank the bringer of the amendment and ask you to support the resolution.
Any further discussion? Okay, we do have a Committee of the Whole amendment, so if we get that right in, if somebody could come up to the dais, that'd be great.
Senate Joint Resolution 3, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1, page 3 after line 23, insert.
Senator Boner on the Committee of the Whole Amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move committee of the whole amendment number 1 to Senate Joint Resolution 3. Ladies and gentlemen, what this does is it acknowledges another important element that touches on some of the discussion we just had, and that's the private property rights are affected by these orders. As was previously discussed, it's not as if there's a big block of federal land or federal minerals out there by itself. These are often intermingled, the checkerboard being an obvious example. But even in places like the Powder River Basin where, in Commerce County, the area of the Commerce County EIS, for example, is less than 10% federal surface. So less than 10% actual federal land, but about low 60% of the minerals underneath are owned by the federal government. In a world where we have to drill up to 2 miles laterally to make sure these wells are most effective, you can't develop without touching those federal minerals. So this additional whereas simply acknowledges that while entirely justified that we focus on oil and gas, there's also significant private property rights that are affected as well. And so that's what the whereas does, hopefully first of a few to improve this resolution. So I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator Boner. We are on committee of the whole amendment number 1 to Senate Joint Resolution number 3, an additional whereas. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Boner's motion to adopt committee of the whole amendment number 1 to Senate Joint Resolution number 3, please say aye. Those opposed, no. That amendment has carried. We're back on the Senate Joint Resolution number 3. Any additional questions or discussion?
Any further discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, this situation appalls me, the way the federal government's policy is affecting us here in Wyoming. As mentioned, affects our people, our livelihood, and the future of our state in a negative way. I am standing for and on the bill. I wish to send as strong as message as possible of a protest of how we've been treated and the position we've been put in with its new current administration and president. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? A question being called. All those in favor of Senator Anderson's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report that do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate Joint Resolution 3, please say aye. All opposed, say no. Senate Joint Resolution 3 is passed committee of the whole. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 143. The reading clerk will read in the Senate file.
Senate File 143, School Finance Funding Model Amendments, sponsored by Senator Scott. An act relating to school finance was referred to committee number 4, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Bikeman, Ellis, Salazar, and Scott. No Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I move when the committee of the whole rise and report it do so with a recommendation that Senate File 143 do pass. There was a standing committee amendment. And Mr. Chairman, what I wish to do is say a few words on the bill, set the stage, and then go to the standing committee amendment, because that will be an effective way of explaining most of the contents of the bill. Mr. Chairman, this is the school recalibration. It is not the official recalibration bill. That went over to the other side to start with. There are some problems in that other bill. It may or may not get here. If it does, I would prefer we would use that bill, but this one is the one we have before us. It will serve as a backup. I hope we'll pass it. If it's going to be an effective backup, you have to pass it. Let me say just a few things. This is an area in which we've seen significant litigation in the past and may see it again. So I do want to start out by reading the provision in the state constitution that is relevant here. And it is Article 7, Section 9. It's entitled Taxation for Schools. The legislature shall make such further provision by taxation or otherwise as with income arising from the general school fund
will create and maintain a thorough and efficient system of public schools adequate to the proper instruction of youth of the state between the ages of 6 and 21 years, free of charge, et cetera. And Mr. Chairman, the provision I would emphasize there that is really what we're doing with this bill is it's required to be an efficient system. That's what we're working on here. We can, in the past, we have set a basket of goods, so-called. That has to do with the thoroughness. This has to do with the efficiency. And so that's what this is all about. It's something we do periodically. And let me say in the way of background, there was an extremely useful report that was done that we paid for. It's the 2020 recalibration of Wyoming's education resource block grant model. The final report was submitted to the our select committee on school finance recalibration on December 1st of last year. And I commend it to you. It has all kinds of valuable information about what's going on in schools. It has some very useful charts showing how the schools have performed on both our own assessment test, the YTOP assessment, and the National Assessment of Educational Progress, commonly known as the NAEP test. And they're very instructive. And the consultants gave us some very good guidance on that. And let me just read, there's about 3 quotes. They sort of all go along the same line. It says on this, I'm quoting from page 3 of the report, as shown in chapter 2, data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, suggests improvement in school performance have not grown at the same pace as the growth in revenues for education in Wyoming. And they have a chart. I have a separate chart from the Legislative Service Office that shows how much the growth has been at the time of the Campbell 1 court decision in the 95-96 school year. The expenditures we are making per student were $5,165 per student. In the last school year, the last one was completed, they are $15,966 per student. That's the LSO fee. That's quite a growth. It is a significant portion of that is inflation, but there's a major portion, majority of it is not. It's a real increase in spending for schools that we've had over the period since the Campbell 1 decision. And here we have the consultant saying, suggest improvements in school performance have not grown at the same pace as revenues education Wyoming. Now, that's not to say the schools are bad. We are, you look at and they have it here, the national assessment of the NAEP test, we are better than average. And we were at the time of the Campbell 1 decision, and we are now. And that has improved. But the consultants say it hasn't, we aren't getting our money's worth out of it. And they also looked at both the NAEP test and our own assessment test, which is the YTOP test. And they say, they summarize it on page 11, bottom page 11. These performance levels are not adequate for graduates to access jobs
in the higher skill, higher wage economy we're seeking to build. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a real problem. And let me say, Mr. Chairman, make it very clear, some people, I've said this a number of times in public, I'm getting some feedback that some of the people involved in schools think that they're being personally criticized. And I want to make very clear that's not what we're trying to do. The skill and dedication of our teachers, our principals, people in school systems, I don't think is in question here. What's in question is the system under which they're working. That's what we're responsible for. And the funding of that system has a good deal to do with how it actually works. And that's what we're talking about, Mr. Chairman, in this bill. So I want those to be our twin focuses, that we are trying to improve the efficiency of the system and that we are trying to improve the quality of the output, the results of the system. And the system is where the problem is. It's not the people, it's the system. And that's got to be, and that's the thing, which is just well, because that's the thing we can do something about. Mr. Chairman, before we go into the specifics, let me say one other thing here. This bill is quite lengthy. And the reason for the length, other than the sheer complication, now this is the biggest item we spend money on the state government. It is complicated. The reason for the length of the bill is previously we have put the details of how the school finance model works in what's called attachment A, which is sort of an uncodified, not generally available to the public easily, piece of law. And our legislative service offices, my understanding, they were the ones who came to the recalibration committee and said, look, this isn't working. We're having trouble keeping track of where the law is and getting everybody to understand it. Make it actual statute, and then it'll be right out in public. Everybody can see it. Everybody can look it up. That's readily available, and we can keep control of it. And Mr. Chairman, I would say that was extremely wise. I have seen where that sort of thing was not done. You look at the federal Medicaid law, and it is just impossible because they have not kept it up to date, and you can't figure out what they're doing. I think that was a very sound move, and it does add considerable length to this bill. And you ask questions and some of the stuff, what we'll say, that's what the current law is. It's just, it looks like it's being created new, but we're shifting it from that attachment A we're getting rid of to the actual statute books. And so that's important to understand. Now, Mr. Chairman, at this point, I would ask that the standing committee amendment be read in.
Senate File 143, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 6, line 6, delete.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move the standing committee amendment. Mr. Chairman, with your leave, this is quite lengthy. I would ask that you have the latitude, if any member has a question as we go through these sections, and I'll pause and say we're going to go on the next section or something like that, so you can tell if there's questions. I think it'd be easier to answer them as we go through this rather than wait to the end and have dozens of questions and people have forgotten what the subject is and all that sort of thing, Mr. Chairman.
the first item in the standing committee amendments, page 1, lines 1 through 22. Yeah, 1 through, what's going on here is, it's actually 1 through 11, excuse me. What's going on here is a major complaint the Senate has had for years with the school foundation system is the so-called ghost teachers. What goes on and has gone on is the block grant model calls for a certain number of teachers, which is a product of some special provisions for small schools, plus the class size that's set forth in the model. And for years, I don't think there's ever been as many teachers as the model calls for. They've gone to a higher class size. They're teachers that they get paid for under the model that simply do not exist. The figures I got from the Legislative Service Office show that currently the model provides for 6,840 teachers. There are 6,022 actual ones. The difference is 818 that simply do not exist, that we are paying the districts full salary and benefits for. And I call it a slush fund. You can call it whatever you want to. But that money is diverted to other uses. There's a thing called the COPE report, I believe, that details where this money is actually going. And what that shows is that a lot of it is going into administration. A lot of it is going into the activities, the athletics, and then some of the related things or other things in that category. Those are being funded by schools well above average, both of those, well above what the model calls for. And some of it is going into higher teacher salaries. And we'll deal with those issues independently. But what this part of the amendment does is it says we're going to get rid of that paying for teachers that do not exist by raising the class size much closer to actual. And you can see it raises the elementary grades, it raises the class size to 20, and the secondary, it raises it to 23. It's more of a raise, it's twice the raise in the elementary levels it is in the secondary. This is largely elementary school teachers that we're missing, not entirely. That does reduce the number of teachers in the model by 901. So that is 80 some more than the ones that aren't there. So we are overachieving slightly. We underachieve if we go one less. And so you get caught between because it doesn't seem reasonable to have a part of a teacher somehow. I have unfortunate mental images of what a part of a teacher would look like, Mr. Chairman. There are some ways that we'll deal with that later on in the amendment. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the first item. It's the biggest money item on the sheet that I think I've passed out to almost everybody in the room, including it was passed out to the public at the committee meeting. This is the biggest dollar item in the reduction. For those of you who have that sheet, somebody who doesn't have it and wants it, see me at lunchtime, I've got more copies. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor just for a question for the speaker.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Senator Kinsey.
I just want to make sure I understand. So Senate File 143 takes what used to be Exhibit A and Schedule A and incorporates it into the bill. Senate 143 as written represents the status quo, and the amendment is the proposed changes then, is that correct, Senator?
Okay. That,
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the senator for the question because it does clear up one thing. Senate File 143 as introduced, what I was trying to do is get a vehicle that could be amended as we learn more. And you know how long it takes to get something this complicated through the paper factory. So what I did in the bill drafting instructions was ask for an increase of 1. So the actual number that we're increasing from in the existing law is 1 less than this. It's 16 at the elementary level, and at the secondary and middle school or junior high level, it's 21 instead of 22. So just the mechanics of this, the drafting, it does mean that the actual change from the current law is 1 more than what you would think if you just did the math on this. And Mr. Chairman, that is a significant dollar point. And it's important to understand it. So I thank the senator for the question. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Senator Scott looks like we have another question. That's okay. Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one quick question. When we computed ghost teachers, the amount of ghost teachers, did we include the number of ghost students that help drives ghost teachers?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, no, the number of students, that is a well-established figure. It's reported like all information systems. It's subject to an occasional error. But it is heavily used and corrected. Now, there will be, you'll see later in the amendment, Mr. Chairman, a provision where we have used a 3-year rolling average to compute. We're changing that, and that we'll get to that in due course of time, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, the next item is starts on page 1 of the amendment at line 12 and 13. It's instructional coaches or instructional facilitators. They're also called. Here, what's going on is one of the other members in the other body did some work, and LSO staffed it out for him, and he very graciously and supportively shared it with me, and I stole it. Mr. Chairman, I've always found in this outfit, our voters don't care who you steal an idea from. What they care is did you steal the right one? So I frankly have stolen the work of another member, and he was very gracious in sharing it. These are in the model. The school districts have not used them to the extent that they're in the model. We're reducing the total down closer to the actual. We don't quite get it to actual because there's always a few vacancy positions, and the representative doing the work chose not to go quite to actual, and I think that's safe. But it does reduce those, so there is a savings in the model, a savings that cannot be diverted to other purposes because it won't be there. So that's the next section, lines 12 through 22. And I would say, Mr. Chairman, that there's material in court decisions that, as I understand it, they think relying on what the school district are actually doing is a good way to get at what the actual cost is. And you can see the logic in that. The next section, Mr. Chairman, it starts down on line 27. It's the tutors, same discussion as for the instructional coaches. School districts are doing things in a different way. They're not using all the tutors that are available in the model. And again, we reduce it to actual, but not quite all the way to actual, to allow for the fact that there's normally, Mr. Chairman, some vacancies. The next item on page 1, extended day and summer school. The recommendation I had from my source was to eliminate that entirely. Consulted with a member of this body that was on the recalibration committee, and recommendation you can see at the bottom of page 1, top of page 2, is that we try to retain the summer school program that is the 3-week reading recovery program in the early primary grades. Mr. Chairman, that is the expert information we got from an experienced member of our body, is that that's a very useful program. And also, there's a thing called graduation credit recovery. When a student is a few credits short of graduation, they can take a course in the summer school and basically be allowed to graduate same time as their peers. That's very useful to a lot of students. The result is we don't get quite the savings that eliminating it all gets, but I think that it's wise to retain those programs that the experts say really do work. The next section, Mr. Chairman, is in the activities area. It starts on the top of page 2 at line 4 and goes all the way over to page 3, line 34 in the amendment. We simply took a 10% cut there on the theory that these are tough times, and those are things that are not critical to the mission of the school. They're very important, I think. Frankly, I've seen that personally with my kids. I had a son that was in the football program at our local high school. The one that's run by a member of this legislature, very well-run program. It did my son a good deal of good. I saw my daughter get quite a bit of really excellent experience on a junior high girls basketball team that came together. Very valuable, but that's something I think 10% less, although I had no idea it was going to take this many pages, this many lines of the amendment to do it, but 10% reduction there. The next item is on the teachers' salaries. And this is a different sort of an item. There's 2 things going on in this section. We are proposing a major increase. Let me stress that again because it's different. Increase in the teacher's salaries over what's now in the model. We're relying again on the actual practice in the school districts. We don't quite get them up to what the financial analysis shows they are actually making, but there's an interplay with all these other things that you have to take into account. We get them very close. And then we remove, right now they're being paid for 5 professional development days. Some of the experts that I consulted with said, well, we could really reduce that to 3. Some of the experts in this body, and they can identify themselves if they choose to or not, said, no, those really have not proved to be worthwhile. You could get rid of them all, and the teachers are getting their professional development in other ways anyhow. So both of those things are in the same figure. There's still a major increase here. Order 50 million or so for the teachers in terms of improving their salaries, even when you net out the removal of the professional days. And Mr. Chairman, I think that's important. When you're looking at this, when you're trying to improve the quality, you want the people who are
actually delivering the instruction to the students, who are the ones that are responsible for their classroom and the learning that goes on in it. You want them to be paid well, so we get the best. And that's been our policy all along. That's what we're doing in this. This is a place we are explicitly ignoring the recommendation of the consultants in the model and going with what our school districts are actually doing. And that is I think, a very important feature of this. I can't emphasize it enough. And that's what's going on at the bottom of page 3, top of page 4. The next item is you'd think it is a good deal lesser item, but it turns out to have some significant money in it. And it relates to groundskeepers. The people that take care of the grounds, shovel the snow in the winter, I guess, and fix the fences around the schools and maintain the lawns and all that sort of things. What we're doing is saying, look, that's a feature that can be privatized at significant savings. And the proxy for the savings we found was to say, on those, we don't need to assume for model purposes that there will be health insurance or the retirement benefits that the state offers. So the proxy for the savings for privatizations to take those two elements out of the model reimbursement. And that's what that section does. We tried to figure a way to put in privatize your groundskeepers, but that doesn't seem to be, we couldn't figure a way to say that in an economical fashion that didn't have unintended consequences. So we've just built the model on the assumption that they will. And that not associated with the core instruction at all, but it is an efficiency we can get. The next item is starts on page 4, line 20, the regional cost adjustment. We're right now, you have 3 choices essentially. One of them is basically stay where you are. The other one is the Wyoming Cost of Living Index. The third one is what's here, which is the hedonic wage index computed during the 2020 recalibration. It's a recomputation of that. That seems to be the best fit for the most districts. Right now, the district's got a choice. We're saying, let's do it one uniformly across the state. And that it's a significant savings doing it that way, puts everybody on the same basis, same philosophy, developing the index that everybody's using. If you have a choice, what it does mathematically is it ratchets your spending up because the school district will choose whichever is the best for it. And so you're always creeping the average escalate. So that's that change. The next one is starts on page 4 of the amendment, the cap on salaries. One of the members of our committee did some research and discovered that from publicly available data that frankly our salaries are getting out of hand. So we drafted it as putting the cap on as what we're paying our governor. There was complaint about that. And what this amendment does is goes from that for the cap to 130,400, which is my understanding of what the consultants actually recommend. There was a suggestion earlier of 115, that proved to be an average. This is what the consultants are actually recommending for the highest level of
cap for the superintendents, as I understand it. And Mr. Chairman, we have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Actually, was looking at that and was a little confused, but I do see this is the cap just for superintendent salaries, as I understand it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may
Senator Scott.
answer that. Mr. Chairman, no, this is a cap for any salary in the district. And we're using superintendents because that's the best paid of them. So this cap doesn't get rid of all the salary escalation we've seen in the administrative area, and we've seen considerable. That's one of the places that this money for the ghost teachers is boosting up administrative salaries. And this is just trying to rein in the very high end. And there is provision, when you look at the provisions in the bill, whether some of them will have contracts and whatnot, they'll have to go, after this next year, they'll have to go to their reserves to pick up those. So that's how this cap is being implemented.
Mr. Chairman. I am
Senator Hicks.
looking at this and it shows in the 1920 school year, the funding model weighted average salary for superintendents was $114,210. The actual was $141,525. That's statewide, which is about 24% over the funding model.
Yeah, and we
Senator
chose,
Scott.
Mr. Chairman, with this amendment, we're choosing to go to the recommendations in the funding model, as I understand it. But we did make sure that it covers, and you'll see that starting on line 41, we're including in that salary some of the perks that other people don't get. Not the health insurance and then other standard benefits that everybody gets, but some of the extra perks, and you can see them: housing stipends, bonuses, compensation for personal expenses, that sort of thing. So it's a little more rigorous. So that's there, and you need to be aware of that. Mr. Chairman, I believe we had another question.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a point of clarification to the chairman, this does not preclude a local district from kicking in local revenues or their reserve funds. If this is a market-driven situation out there for our superintendents, in order to get one, it's okay for a district to go above it. This just represents what the state is going to reimburse. Is that correct?
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, it's a little fiercer than that. This is a ceiling for a new hire. The ceiling would apply. If we find that they can't hire people at these higher wages, then we may have to come back and modify things. But this is an actual cap, and where it'll come into play, I think, will be most with superintendents, and they have contractual obligations with it. They got one on board already that'll be able to continue. But we're hearing as high as a lot of them in the 200,000 range, some as high as 240,000. And that's a matter of judgment. And anybody that wants to bring an amendment can challenge our judgment. And that is a matter of judgment. But what we relied on was the consultant's recommendations as to where the appropriate ceiling was.
Yes, Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we need to clarify, because I think we've heard two different things. At first, it sounded like we could, with this cap, if local school districts wanted to pay above and beyond, that could come out of their reserves. Now I'm hearing something different, that this is a hard cap and they can't do that. So maybe Mr. Chairman of Education could clarify his remarks just a little bit. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, the bill as written, as I read it, is that for existing employees, and those are the ones where you may have contractual obligation, you can continue to pay over the cap. You have to go to your reserves to do it. I don't think that will be a particular problem for any district. But for a new hire, yeah, cap, once this is effective, the cap will apply. And so it's kind of a mixture of the two approaches, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, seeing no further questions on that one, we have some things that are just the conforming amendments when you start a new section. And then we have the provision that also relates to the class size that we talked about earlier. It does feature in this particular piece, that's line 16 through 31. And then on bottom of page 5, we've got the removal of the professional days that was earlier shown in that the salary amendment where we were, because it changes the salaries, you have to put it in both places. Then on page 52, on page 6, starting at line 5 through line 24, we spoke earlier that we were getting rid of the 3-year rolling average. This is the provision that does that. It goes to using the 2019-2020 school year for the next one, and then we'll go back to an annual. You look at with the previous year, you have to avoid some of the strange things that COVID did to stuff. But this is the provision removing the 3-year cap. And then on page 53, on page 6, line 26, reference page 53 in the bill. This is taking insurance to actual use. Right now, in the model, we assume we're providing health insurance benefits to everybody at the same cost as we have for our state insurance plan. And it turns out there's a small amount of duplication where for one technical reason or another, a single employee appeared twice in the model and we were paying double to the school district. That's not real significant. Mostly what's happening here is we have discovered that slightly over 27% of the total school district employees do not take the health insurance benefits. And it's just sort of 60 million, just loose money that can be spent anywhere. That's an obvious efficiency to only pay for what you're using. And it's a big money one. So that's what's in this section. Frankly, Mr. Chairman, for a while, I thought it'd be a good idea to take a little percentage too, because our state employees plan is much more expensive than what's often available in the market. But we didn't choose to do that this time. Enough is enough. Then there's an item on page 7, last page of the amendment. Page 57, lines 8 through 22, delete entirely. The bill as introduced had the concept that was in the general recalibration bill, the recalibration committee did, of an across-the-board cut. But I reduced the amount to just 1 million, so that if we decided we wanted to use that concept, that we would have something to base it on, some pricing in the fiscal note. We say, okay, well, we're going to do 10 million, multiply what's in the fiscal note by 10. And it would be in the bill, so it would be easy to amend. It is, I think, the unanimous recommendation, Mr. Chairman, of your Education Committee to remove that across the board cut
The court very much looks at the model and doesn't like across the board cuts. And frankly, I think they're right that with the system we've got, you've got to go look at the individual items. Now, I've heard some people say, well, but you're doing an à la carte reduction. Well, they object to the across the board cut too. They're going to object to any of them. But we're doing specific reductions that we think, reductions and increases that we think we can justify. So we're removing that across the board cut. That's that provision there. Then we change the transportation around. We go to a base year of 2018, 2019 to get entirely within the, away from the COVID and take 90% of it. And there's a further provision in the bill that there's a 2-year sunset on that provision. And the Joint Education Committee is charged with trying to develop a formula. This business, I'm almost through. This business of having a full reimbursement is just not, it causes the cost to just escalate. So we're trying to get away from that, but it'll take some work. So we got a proxy in here for 2 years. The last provision in the Standing Committee amendment, there was a provision relating to special education and the bill is introduced. The Appropriations Committee came up with another bill seeking to do the same thing, which was to try to force the use of the Medicaid program here to save our general fund. And that bill is passing. So we said, we'll just get the special education provisions entirely out of this bill. That's what the last provision does. Mr. Chairman, that's the Standing Committee amendment. I hope we've answered the questions on it. I urge its adoption.
Okay, any questions on the Standing Committee amendment? Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to say some things, not that I'm opposed to cuts, because we do need some cuts, but there's some things in here that we've got to look at carefully with the data that we don't have right now, although we can get it. I've been able to achieve some of it here shortly. But I want to caution us on perception and reality. We've had a lot of things thrown at us that are not necessarily correct as far as the reality, but we have the perception that that's really the way it is. Years ago, we were ranked 25th with the NAEP testing. We're currently 6th. We have pushed very hard with our school systems to move in that direction. And our school systems need to be commended for that. The state test in the last few years has finally stayed to the same one, but we've changed from pause. Well, it started out before pause with a different one and it kept bouncing around. So to try to say through the years, this all worked out to see whether there's improvement is rather difficult. I was fortunate enough to be on the recalibration group and I had talked with Picus Newton and I debated him. Unfortunately, they can't show you anybody that's doing any better than us. Unfortunately, the next closest to us is Arkansas. And I'll let you determine whether that's where you want to be or not. But when you look at their platform, you want to remember these people come from colleges. You want to remember that their tests have been individually in different school systems and not all of them compiled as one thing. So they're taking individual things to say they should work and put them together to come up with a result. There's a difference and the impact can't show the same. These consultants may be really good in large school systems, but we're a frontier state and these don't always fit with us. And I think it's important we understand that. As I go through this, I want you to understand that I do believe we can cut. I'm not saying we can't. And I do believe that the school systems will cut. But when you get cut down all the time and chopped and battled, it becomes pretty difficult for you to try to say, okay, I'm willing to work with you. And that becomes part of the problem and the perception. We want to remember that legislator created the block grant. Legislators set up the number of teachers through the Picus-Odin information to provide us with the number of teachers we should have. And because at one time we had good money, we even cut it a little lower on class sizes and all, so that increased the number of teachers. The particular last amount that was recommended to be paid by Picus and Odin before now was about $36,000 per teacher. I think you want your best teachers getting more than that. I think that if we want our students to be the students we're looking for, we want a fair salary for them. I'm not saying that salary has to be the top of everything, but I think if they were ranked within the 75th percentile of the state.
Senator Kinski, point of order.
I'm loath to interrupt my recalibration colleague, but are you speaking on the bill or on the amendment? Because we're on the amendment.
This fits the amendment.
Okay.
It also fits the bill.
All right.
But it definitely ties into the amendment. When we look at the different areas on the amendment, we need the data to support us. We need to think about things like the groundkeepers, people clearing snow, those kinds of things. In large city, we can get private, maybe. I don't think our smaller towns are going to be able to get some company to come in and remove that snow or to take care of those lawns. I think we have to be careful with looking at the data and making evaluations of what best of our particular changes with these amendments match up here. You can look at the data and make the decisions for yourself, but I want us to be careful because the changes, some of these changes are pretty substantial. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Senator Kinski, you were up next.
Mr. Chairman. Just very, very briefly, on the break, I'm going to, as perhaps others, I'm going to take these changes from this amendment, and I'm going to have to cut and paste some paragraphs so I can get a real good look at it. I'd be happy to share that with anybody that wants to try and understand my handwriting. And but this question for the bringer of the amendment, will we be getting a revised fiscal note from staff on the impact of the bill? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, real quick. Senator Scott can answer, and I think we have to go to the majority floor leader after this.
Mr. Chairman, I will see that we get, as quick as we can get it computed, a revised, it may not be a fiscal note, it'll maybe a redo of that one-page, a two-page pass out that we had, but it'll show what's going on.
Senator Driscoll.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee of the whole beg leave to rise and sit again.
Okay, you've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. The motion carries.
You've heard the motion. Announcements? Senator Hicks?
Mr. President, your Rules Committee will be meeting at 12:30 to take up Senate File 147, Management Council Authority and Legislative Committees in room 110 at 12:30.
Thank you, Senator Wasserberger. Oh. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Your committee, Labor, Health, and Social Services, the perfect 10 will meet in the health spa, otherwise room 6 in the extension, to hear Senate File 129, Medicaid coverage and licensed pharmacist.
Thank you, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, agricultural, will meet upon adjournment today in Capitol Extension Room W2N online to consider House Bill 52, Wyoming School Protein Enhancement Project, House Bill 54, Wyoming Meat Packing Initiative, and House Bill 118, Food Freedom Act amendments.
Thank you. Further announcements? Senator Driscoll.
Mr. President, I move we stand recessed till 2 p.m.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? We stand recessed until 2 p.m.